Welcome back, everybody. It is 6:45, and if you just tuned in, we are in conversation with Lynette Maart, the National Director of Black Sash, and we're discussing the ruling by the Constitutional Court yesterday that ordered Minister Bathabile Dlamini to pay personally 20% of Black Sash and freedom under law's legal costs. Hello again, Lynette. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, I want to engage you on why is it that Bathabile Dlamini is always thrust in the spotlight, yet it was a collective decision. Whatever decision she took, it was a collective decision, and it just rightly mentioned the Parliament failed in its oversight duties.
Well, you need to ask that question to the Minister, why she's in the spotlight. Yeah.
I mean, why isn't Parliament then being taken to task for having failed in its oversight duties?
That's a very interesting question. And I think one needs to really ponder around Parliament's role in relation to holding the executive to account and what can be done to beef up that role, or how to hold Parliament to account if it does not perform its duties.
Well, last month, the Constitutional Court ruled that SASSA and the then interim CEO, Pearl Bengu, were liable for costs of an application seeking the extension of the CPS contract. Remember that. And this is worrisome, a situation when the courts have to be the ones holding the executive to account.
Certainly, it is worrying. But I think in the absence of a good mechanism to hold the minister and the executive of SASSA to account, where do the public and civil society go? And that's when, thankfully, we have a constitutional court and a constitution that we can draw on to fulfill that role of holding the executive to account. And I mean, Minister Dlamini, in her arguments, said that the Constitutional Court is not the appropriate structure to hold her accountable. And so this judgment is, in fact, precedent-setting in terms of the Constitutional Court asserting its role of holding the executive to account.
And what does it say about the role of civil society, with regards to this case?
Well, the Black Sash has been working on the issue of social grants over many, many years. And on the ground, we monitor how the state is implementing the right to social security, and particularly the right to social assistance, which in short is called the grants. And from our monitoring activities, we have seen many, many different practices. And when we saw the deductions from people's bank accounts, or the SASSA bank account held in Grindrod Bank, in which grants are paid, the deductions for airtime, electricity, water, loans, funeral policies, our partners on the ground said there is something amiss here. And so we walked the very slow journey of making the public, the executive, the court aware of these practices on the ground that emanated from the contract with CPS and its mother body, Net1. And so it's walking that journey very slowly. The minister made some regulations to curb these practices. But when it came to the issue of terminating the contract with CPS, there was quite a lot of slowing down of the process. So I think civil society certainly has a role to play in terms of monitoring, in terms of education and strategic public litigation, where the executive is not playing its role. We spent a long time on a ministerial task team to try and fix these problems, but I think it lacked the political will to take forward the issues and the recommendations. So yes, the court became the last resort.
Yeah, and we also saw the Black Sash regional manager Thandiwe Zulu saying that this is actually a victory when it comes to accountability, and it sort of sets a precedent and a trend for every government department to be held fully liable and, where power is misused. To what extent do you think this will stretch, though?
I think once a precedent is set, whenever there is judgments or orders that has to be made in terms of accountability, this case can be used as a precedent-setting case for that in that matter. So yes, I would concur with my colleague Thandiwe Zulu, and yes, it can help to make, in fact, the executive aware of their obligations and that there are consequences if they do not perform their duties well.
What do you think those consequences should be? What do you think those consequences should be? And it will lead to my next question as to what do you think should happen to Minister Bathabile Dlamini?
Well, I think, first of all, the consequence of her paying the legal cost is a very serious one. I think that we would ask President Cyril Ramaphosa to consider her continued participation in his cabinet. And yeah, I think those are some of the consequences which we would like the executive to consider.
You know, some political pundits have been saying that, there needs to be struck a balance between civil society and the executive. Someone is even mentioning that, the fact that the civil society group like Black Sash and Freedom Under Law are taking the Department of Social Development to court is an indication that they are now annexing the roles and the duties of a government department. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that government departments have their role to play, but if they fail to play that role and the executive is not holding them accountable, where do people go? Where do grant beneficiaries go when they are not going to receive their grant on the 1st of April 2017? What's going to happen to them? So I think that there is a role for government to play, for the executive to play, and if it performs its functions well, then there would not be a need for civil society. But what we've seen over the last decade is that government has failed to deliver on some of its promises. And so there will be a role for civil society.
Perhaps I need to ask you, what powers does the Constitutional Court have to fix a situation where the only way to deliver social grants, which of course the state is obliged to do because of a constitutional obligation, would be?
Sorry, will you just repeat your question?
What powers does the Constitutional Court have, in order to fix a situation where the only way to deliver social grants, which the state, of course, is obliged to do because of a constitutional obligation, would be through a process that, without court validation, would be unfair and unlawful and invalid, perhaps?
Well, in this instance, we approached the court because we saw the crisis. And the Constitution gives the Constitutional Court some powers in respect of holding public officials to account. And this has been done in the case of the SASSA crisis. So certainly the Constitution gives the Constitutional Court powers to hold the executive to account.
All right, Lynette Maart, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that is Lynette Maart. She's the Black Sash National Director on the Constitutional Court decision that forces Minister Bathabile Dlamini, the former Minister of Social Development, to pay 20% of legal costs in her personal capacity.